What's up, you wonderful people? Sorry for my absence, but I've been super sick recently. Sicker than I've been for a very, very long time, actually, which sucks. But a few people have approached me, especially after the web shows and threads popping up on MMO Champion and the WoW forums, specifically around TOS, with them being put off. Not because of the difficulty, which is what you might expect, but more because it seems incredibly overwhelming to get into raiding right now, certainly if you're looking to push yourself past that heroic boundary, step up into Mythic after seeing what it's like. And from personal experience, we've had a few trials who have definitely walked in and gone, this is a bit too much. This is a bit too much for what I'm used to, and I'm really uncomfortable, and specifically if they've missed out on progress, which is a very big deal that you might not be aware of if you've never been a long-term raider before. If you miss out on all the wipes and you walk into a guild that's, say, farming something, and you just are presented with a huge amount of things to deal with, it could be a little bit too much. Now, I wanted to talk about being overwhelmed in raiding because, obviously, for some people, I've contributed to that, which I never want to do. I always want people to step up to the challenge. I've made a number of videos about being the volunteer and how important it is that when a necessary job comes up, that you be the guy to put your hand up and say, let me deal with this. Let me get involved. And by doing so, you become a better player because you're doing all your ordinary things like just DPSing or healing, but simultaneously, you're already learning to do multitasking at the same time while maintaining those things and being able to do things that other players can't. That separates you from the crowd. Now, I would say in WoD, that was a usual thing. There'd be some bosses where 4 or 5 people, perhaps, were required to do something a little out of the ordinary in order to help the guild kill that boss. But once you get to TOS, certainly, and as of Nighthold, that is not the case. In fact, once you get to Mythic, it's pretty much everybody in the raid is going to do something pretty important, or you're going to kill everybody in the most horrific way. Now, I think a big part of the contribution to the overwhelming status has been looking at streams, or, you click a stream of myself or Slooty, or you click a YouTube video of somebody who's killed a boss, and one thing you'll notice that is very different from this environment, which is just the LFR environment, which you might be used to in the worst case scenarios. You're used to doing LFR raiding, and then you click onto somebody else's, and you're presented with this, right? This. And I think even the most elitist of raiders might understand or might sympathize with somebody who's thinking of getting into raiding, being presented with a full page of notes on just what to do in a single encounter, and might sympathize a little bit that that's a little bit off-putting. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It absolutely shouldn't be. Now, well, first of all, we are going to look at Fallen Avatar Mythic. I think it's the best example of this. In terms of just how much coordination is required amongst a team to get this boss done. But not only that, it's very separate. This is kind of the worst case scenario. I'm working on Kill Jade and Mythic right now, and it's nowhere near like this. This is very intense. But let's go through some steps so that you don't look at this and you just go, that's a lot of stuff, I want nothing to do with it, right? So, obviously, my name is Preacher, and then you can look here and you can see how many times my name is mentioned on there. And in fact, there are several things that I will be doing outside of this that aren't listed because, one, it just get ridiculous, and and not only that, but there's no need to add them in because they're very specific jobs that have to happen at one time, and only I and a couple of other people will be taking care of those things. There's also a number of things absent from this list, yeah, other than those tasks I just mentioned, which is do the maximum possible DPS you can do, and don't die to the fact that everything in this encounter is either a one-shot or close to a one-shot, while simultaneously being unable to be healed. So if you don't know how this encounter works, you will be taking a debuff, which means you can't really be healed anymore, while simultaneously avoiding everything. So if you think about Heroic, where you might see some people taking a lot of damage from, say, Unbound Chaos, then mixed into the fact that not only might you take that damage, but you can't be healed afterwards, then you've got a recipe for a nightmare, which is why a lot of guilds get stuck on this boss. So first of all, angry assignments. If you're not sure what it's add-on in, it's angry assignments. And more often than not, yes, it serves as a reminder to the players, but for me, angry assignments is actually a raid leader tool. It's a raid leader tool to make sure every single thing that can occur here has been accounted for and people are assigned to it. And if things go wrong, it's very easy for that raid leader to check back and go, okay, who did we assign to this at some point? Now, you've got to remember, when it's looking at things like angry assignments, is that this is built up over the term of progress. It might start with something like a couple of lines. Like, we're going to set this out. Then we're going to pull the boss a few times, and then we're going to be figuring out what happens later, right? And then it starts building up like this. It doesn't just come into its natural life as this huge, abundant piece of information. Not only that, much of this information probably doesn't pertain to you. And I think that's really important, is that people understand that when you look at things like this isn't really information that's all for you. In fact, it's not really. A lot of it is actually just for everyone else and not for you whatsoever. Which allows you to then say, okay, I don't need to be overwhelmed by this. I don't need to be taken in by this, because a lot of it actually doesn't pertain to me. It's a lot of stuff that's for other people. The next tip here is actually to say, I understand what's going on in this fight. Now, that sounds really simple, doesn't it? But there are many people who don't really know, even after watching a fight many, many times on streams. I've joined a lot of streams. I generally lurk in a lot of streams. And watching certain players who I like doing certain fights. And I can see in the chat that there's people who've been there for a very long time who still don't really know what's happening. They get a general idea of what looks like to be happening, but they're not really sure what's going on. In particular, in fights like this, there are many things going on that you just can't see from one player's point of view. And those things are totally lost on anybody watching those streams. Now, there's no issue with that. That's not to say those guys are noobs. But what you have is a situation where you're not particularly clear on what's happening. Now, if you do know what's going on because you want to get into raiding and you understand that these things are things that you should be aware of, is it actually simplifies all this stuff much, much more. Much, much more. If we realistically look at the amount of times my name is mentioned here, but break down what's actually going on. So what's happening with these beams? I'm going to be soaking a beam. On the first beam, I'm the third person. I'm going to be following Azuriel. Now, what's the mechanic here? Well, it's pretty simple. We actually just don't want this beam to hit the boss. That's it. So we're going to stand in front of the beam. I'm going to take 7 stacks, and then I'm going to move out, and Rularu is going to take over from me. Now, the way this is designed and has been set up by our raid leader is there's actually one more person, in fact 2 more people than are in the first beams who are actually part of my same group. Okay, those would be in the second beam. They would be Toe Grinder and Big T. Now, all that's happening, and this takes up the vast majority of these assignments, is that we're just shuffling people down one at a time. That's it. There's nothing else going on here. All this information is just a reminder of what are a visual indicator for the group of what's supposed to be happening. So what do I realistically want to take away from this? Well, I want to take away that I follow Azuriel, and that's it. That's all I want to know. Anything else is just arbitrary information. It'll go on like this forever, but at no point will it change that I go after Azuriel. That's it. When Azuriel finishes the second beam, I start the third beam, and it continues on like that. Now, from there, we can actually simplify this process even more, and I think this is what players need to do when they see information like this and things get assigned out. It's like, what tools do I actually have to simplify this process? Well, there are a number of things you can do. One of them particularly involving add-ons. So if you've got weak auras or tell me when, what is the information I need again? I just need to make sure I follow Azuriel. That's it. So all I'm going to do, and as you can see on my screen, is focus Azuriel. I'm just going to keep an eye on what she's doing. And if she starts taking stacks, I know I'm up next. And I get a clear indicator of that. Remember, she's got to take 7 stacks before I have to be involved at all. That means that when I see it going 1, 2, I then know, okay, in 5 stacks, I need to be where I need to be. And I can dispense with all this overloading information. And in fact, make what is considered to be a reasonably complex part of the fight extremely simple. There's no need for me to feel pressure or stress for this. All I need to do is go, oh, Azuriel's taking it. I can not pay attention to this for quite some time, right? I don't need to be watching this. I don't need to be checking lists. I don't need to be monitoring timers. In fact, I'm just going to get a big notification to say, oh, the person I go after, they're taking it now. That means I'm coming up next. Which beam is it? It's the third one. Okay, so I'm going to take the next beam when it spawns. Maybe I'm even going to do a call out. Third beams are coming. Why do I know that? Because I know, because I saw in my notifications that I'm up next and that I take it first. Do you see how you can very simplify this? And it's actually when you see very complex fights like this, once you break it down, it actually isn't that complex at all. Everybody's got a very minor, and this is a classic thing that Blizzard's doing now in Mythic, is giving everybody relatively simple jobs, but extremely punishing. Like, if I was to make the mistake here, sure, I'm probably going to wipe the raid, right? But that's not what I'm worried about. That's not what interests me, because I'm not going to get it wrong, because I can easily make sure I'm where I need to be. Similar with soaking down below is, again, I mentioned a number of times of where I need to be, what position I need to be in. However, again, it's ultimately simple. If we look at the next part where it says purple, red cross, skull, blue, and I'm at the red cross. It's just a marker on the floor. Again, it's nothing to be worried about. I see a red cross, I'm going to stand near there. That's it. There's nothing more to this that I need to worry about than that. And all I'm going to do is soak a meteor should it land near there. That's it. And that's all that's happening here is, again, relatively simple jobs, which is all they are in Mythic, is each person has a relatively simple job, but everybody needs to do it. And that's why you can sort of free yourself from it being like this oppressive nightmare. And a lot of people call these fights nightmares. And I think what a lot of players need to do is simply step back from all this and take a focus on what's going to happen. The last thing I want to say here is something we repeat to a hell of a lot of players when we're getting close to a fight, close to the end of a fight, is Mythic has changed and raiding has changed. And I think it's a very difficult change to adapt to if you've not been a part of it. And it can feel overwhelming because if you make mistakes at this point, you're going to be called out immediately and your raid's probably going to consider you untrustworthy. And that is panicking or going for the kill. Greed is very real. I always try and recommend games like Dark Souls or the Dark Souls series to people because it really educates you on the power of patience. And I would say Blizzard's taken a lot of leaves. We know they're big fans of that series, and there are games that are similar to that aren't in that series. But still, they will punish you up until the last 1%. And many players, particularly if you've been in normal and heroic, can kind of get away with bypassing mechanics in the last few percent in order to go for the kill. And it's extremely dangerous. And it's going to get you killed in this scenario. It's going to wipe your entire group. This is one of the reasons why the raid wipe effect that Blizzard has implemented for Mythic, I'm not overly against. I think it's cheap and I think it's boring, but it does punish players going for greed. And you can clearly see where mistakes were made. And being overwhelmed and being panicked is something that I want to instill in you in this video, as there is no reason to be that way if you break down everything into its component parts and say, what really affects me? And is this complicated for me? Because if you're panicking about these things, that's when you're going to start feeling overwhelmed. And that's not what you want from this. So I hope that I put some of your minds at ease when you see all these very long-winded explanations of what's supposed to be happening. If that doesn't alleviate you, let me show you our notes for Made in Mythic, and maybe you'll see not every boss is like that. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.